Welcome to Crappy Reviews. I'm Chris.
And I'm Rob. What's up, everybody? We're happy you're joining us for our early episodes of Crappy Reviews. Before we get started, we'd love to hear your feedback about the show. Do you have a topic you think we should talk about, or just general ideas to make the show better? Let us know in the comments and reviews. We want to get better and earn your subscription. Today, we're staying awake to avoid any potentially dangerous dreams to talk about From Season 2, Episode 8, Forest for the Trees. So opening the episode, we've got Kenny dreaming, where he has a phone ring, which obviously throws us all off. We haven't heard a phone ring like that in the show before. There's a voice on the other end that's repeating some kind of limerick. They touch, they break, they steal. No one here is free. Here they come for three. Unless you stop the melody. From there, he hears and sees the music box for the first time, which I think is a very pivotal point for him moving forward. He definitely knows that Boyd wasn't lying now. And the pot that his mother was cooking in, he sees a huge group of cicadas. And one jumps out and lands on him and burns his arm.
So what's interesting here is that the cicada burn shows up when he wakes up. This happened to Boyd with the cut on his arm earlier in the season. This happened to Kenny. So it appears at this point, per Martin telling us in the tower that worse things are on the way, that you can get hurt in your dreams, which is terrifying.
We are in the first installment of the Nightmare on From Street.
The most terrifying thing is now there's nowhere to hide. And I think this might even lead some other phobias of have nightmares and night terrors and things like that. And are we going to have people to start making mistakes because they're tired and they're going to start hallucinating and what's real and what's not? So no sleep is a pretty scary thing. It could lead to some pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah, another additional stressor that could be added onto the town.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of along the same lines where we've talked about the food shortage potentially coming in as well, kind of layering on top of each other. So after Kenny's dream, we meet up with the Hardy Boys, as I've started to call Jim and Randall. They're messing around with the drone that Randall had brought for his nephew's birthday. But Randall is definitely more focused on asking questions about Jim's theory and the town itself, such as, what's the point of this experiment that Jim thinks is happening? Has he seen anyone actually die? He makes a point that a lot of times people aren't looking out the windows at night because they're afraid to see these atrocities that are happening if someone does get caught. They don't want to look at the monsters either. So, is it all for show? He's asking these kind of very pressing questions of Jim now.
All right, Rob, tell me what you think. Do you think that Randall is asking these questions because he wants people to not pay attention to him because he's asking them? So because he brought it up, don't look at the man behind the curtain? Or do you think he really believes this and he's a conspiracy theorist?
I think that's a very hard question for me to answer right now. However, I do think if he is trying to deflect, he's doing a very good job of it, especially in this episode. I think that there is a chance he's using this as a deflection tactic for himself to take some of the heat off him. But regardless, his ability to deflect is being made very obvious in this episode.
So you brought up a point offline that was interesting. And I had brought up in the last episode that I was already kind of curious about how much weight this drone could hold when they talked about using it for an antenna. Because my drone at home, I know it doesn't hold that much weight. And I'm assuming, to your point, because he bought this for his nephew, and it's probably not something that Nat Geo's using to take video for documentaries, that this thing has a pretty low weight limit. And that's what we found out, that it couldn't lift the antenna. But as you pointed out, could it not lift the antenna because it couldn't? Or does it not lift the antenna because Randall didn't want it to? Because we didn't see Jim use the drone to see if it can go higher or not. We just took Randall's word for it that the drone couldn't get above the tree line. So do you think the drone couldn't get above the tree line because Randall wouldn't let it, or because it just was not able to do it with weight restrictions?
Yeah, I think there's a big theory going around that Randall could be this potential plant that's come up. I know we talked about that last week, obviously, and that was our question of the week to end as well. And I never actually answered that. And this is a good tie-in at the end of the episode. When we get to our theories, I have a little bit of a back and forth between who I think that potential mole is and Randall here. I think we'll get an answer to that point, to you saying, is he deflecting? Was it actually not able to lift it? I think we'll get an answer to that in these last two episodes. I'm so 50-50. I don't think I could give you a good answer right now.
Yeah, the show's done a really good job of pitching him both ways. I think everyone's pretty split because he does some things you're like, that's guaranteed a mole. That's obviously, setting people up and staging it. And then obviously there's times when he was in the bus and some other instances where he seemed legit afraid. And if he was a mole, you seem like he would be less afraid. He would already be aware of the situation and seem a little less afraid. But he seemed pretty uncomfortable with getting out of that bus.
Yeah, the one thing we definitely know for sure is that the fans don't like Randall.
I don't like
That's
him,
including
so.
that's including Harold. Harold on Twitter has made a very strong case that he is not a fan of Randall's character. So that is definitely across the board. We're not 50-50 on his intentions. We're 100% on him as a character. Another person people don't seem very split on is Sarah in town. But she has come to Boyd and said that she wants to leave, partially because she's making the excuse that she could go find information, but partially because it's become obvious that she doesn't want to be around the townspeople anymore.
I can't blame the townspeople. I mean, I can and I can't. So I have sympathy for Sarah because now we're all seeing what she was going through for months before this was happening to everybody else, right? This was going on with her internally. She wasn't telling people. She didn't want to seem crazy. So I do have sympathy. With that said, if somebody in your neighborhood killed a whole bunch of people, you'd probably have a little less sympathy for them. And I feel as if maybe there should be some sort of punishment and maybe not let her walk around totally free. But in the same note, I mean, if someone told you can go home from what you think is essentially a nightmare, what would you do?
Yeah, I think you're right about having the sympathy for her now, which we didn't before. But I also think it would be a good idea to let her go out. That's neither here nor there because Boyd's not letting her. But I don't see the downside at that point. People are obviously not happy with her being there.
And she has to shine.
Shannon.
If she has the shine, then why not send her out there? She probably has a better chance than most in the woods because of the fact that she gets kind of guidance along the way from somewhere else.
Sure. And speaking of going into the woods, Tabitha takes Jade out to the cave where her and Victor escaped from to show him where she had seen the sign after their little come together that they had the last episode. And through their conversations and showing him that, it comes down again to Jade's information that Victor has also seen the sign, which enrages Jade because he was under the impression that Victor had given him all the information he had about that symbol.
No, I don't blame him. I'd be frustrated too, because at this point, it seems like Victor doesn't really want to leave. He doesn't want to find a way out. And he makes the point when Jade confronts him that this is his home. And he says it in a way that makes you think, at least makes me think, that he's kind of content with the situation and he doesn't want to go anywhere. He doesn't want to tempt fate. He's just fine where he's at. And I think in the same note, he doesn't want to see anyone else get hurt. I mean, the guy's been through some stuff and he's seen a lot of people and loved ones get hurt, but he needs to let everyone make those decisions and he needs to give all the information he can. It just seems like either he doesn't want to give it or he doesn't really remember.
Which could easily be the case from some things we've seen that happen later on in this episode as well. Sticking to Victor, we have the scene where Victor goes to the Matthews house. Well, it's the Kenny and Tien Chan house with the Matthews there, but he goes to give Ethan a coat, which I think was a slightly insignificant scene at first, but gives us a good piece of information that he gives him his old coat because he mentions that it's starting to get colder, which, as we noted in the other episodes, the leaves started changing. He mentions that when things start to change around town, that's not a good sign. So he's noticeably saying, it's going to get colder. Here's my coat.
So I have a question for you, and maybe you heard this and I don't remember, but from my understanding, the leaves have not changed in the town as far as anyone else knows. And I think Victor has also said to Ethan, when Ethan brought up, yeah, but leaves change, something to, I'm paraphrasing, leaves change. And Victor said, not here, they don't. But if you go in Victor's room, there's definitely pictures on the wall of bare trees because you can tell between ones that are fully drawn and ones that are obviously dead or bare. So the question is, do they change and Victor's just not saying anything about it and they just haven't changed since other people have been there? Are the cycles a lot longer or is something happening? Because as I brought up offline, season 1, episode 3, Victor's already measuring trees. He's measuring trees for a reason. He's still measuring trees. And now the trees are really moving and the times are changing and we're getting new seasons. So does Victor know that we're coming to the end of a potential cycle?
I think he's definitely the only one who's aware of the changes because everyone else is so focused on the day-to-day happenings with the monsters and other things going on that he's the only one who's got his eye on it. I would assume my takeaway was that it hasn't happened in a long time. Not that it never happened. Basically, since this iteration of what's happened started. Correct.
Yeah.
So he sees it as this foreboding, ominous sign, right? Because the trees are changing in one way or another.
Which is why he gives the coat.
The leaves changing. Which, yes. So he's doing it because Ethan is his friend, and they have this bond that I believe could be on levels past friendship, not to sound weird, but he gives him the coat because he sees what's coming and wants to help his friend Ethan.
So are we looking at Ethan as a potential new Victor? Are we passing a torch with the jacket, or is he just giving his friend a jacket? Because there's a lot of parallels between the two characters, particularly the boy in white.
I think it's both. I think it's him giving his friend a jacket, but for us as an audience, it is a sign. If you listen to our last episode, I go into my theory a bit on what I think everything is happening in the town. And I talked about how there's a little bit of an analog from the different iterations. And I do believe there's a strong chance that Ethan is this iteration's Victor. So I don't know that Victor knows that or sees it that way entirely, but I do think for us as an audience watching the show, it is a little bit of that passing of the torch.
I agree. I mean, it came across very foreshadowy. You know, like you said, I think there's definitely some role reversals going on in the town. A lot of people seem to be taking on these particular roles across the way, and it seems that this would be a likely and pretty straight line character to the new Victor. So I have one more question for you about Victor, because we're on Victor topic. Why can't Victor go in the house?
I'm of two minds here. It's either that he remembers things that happened in those houses and it's too painful for him to go inside.
Okay.
Which would be a very logical one,
I
right?
agree.
If something traumatic happened to you, you wouldn't want to experience it again. Or he's a monster. No, I'm just kidding. I threw it out there. I think there's a
kidding. Did you just want to say and see if people laugh first before?
There is a non-zero chance that Victor was a monster and somehow got out of it. So now he can't go inside, and his memory's been erased because he blocked it out. I don't know. I am more of the mind that traumatic things happen in these houses and he remembers it and he has a hard time going in. Or he could be a normal person and he saw the Matthews house collapse and now he's just worried about all this shoddy construction that's been sitting in this town forever without being maintained. And maybe he just thinks a house is going to fall on top of him. I don't know. My best guess is the trauma of seeing things happen and not wanting to go inside these buildings. That's where I'm at.
I have it's kind of the same, but a little bit different. I think one, either he does have some sort of supernatural or from town kind of reason he can't go in there. Something with the phenomenon in the town stopping him from going in the houses, which I don't think is always true because he can walk into other establishments in the town, Colony House, the diner, the bar, probably, etc. And these all have talismans and he seems to walk in just fine. So it's either he can't walk in, which is why his phrasing was Ethan has to come outside, or I think instead of the fact that there was trauma, I think maybe because of his history with Ethan and the way Jim and Tabitha kind of see him as like kind of a creeper, that maybe he just doesn't want to have any like confrontation if people are there. So he wants Ethan to come outside. I think he's more afraid of being seen in the house with Ethan and what Jim might do than being part of the trauma.
Yeah, I think that's another valid point too. He was doing it of his own accord more than not being necessarily able to go into the house. Speaking of Jim, he and Randall, the Hardy Boys, are back together, and they go to confront Sarah in the church because Randall's on his little crusade now where he wants to find out, has anyone actually seen any of the dead bodies, right? Have you seen someone die and what happened to them after the fact? He's starting to think that maybe people are just leaving, however you want to phrase that. And in the middle of confronting Sarah about Nathan, Donna interrupts, which is just perfect timing after Randall has gone fully headfirst into his theory that Donna is actually the one that we need to be looking out for.
So, I mean, you can't hear my eyes roll because whenever you say Randall, I just immediately roll my eyes because...
You might hate him more than Tilly now.
Man, I hate Randall. I mean, look, Randall could have been an asset because he's the guy in every zombie movie that is okay with just kicking the jerk out the door and not sacrificing everyone else's life, but he just takes it to the next level where he's not like the strong, I'll do what it takes kind of guy anymore. He's just kind of a jerk. And I think he's just spreading, a conspiracy disease. But in this particular situation, he already thinks that Sarah is lying about it, that her brother's still alive. And it does bring up another good point, by the way, that in this scene, we see that Sarah left Pennsylvania. No, she left Boston, right?
No, she was leaving New Hope, Pennsylvania to
go back to Boston because of a difficult situation, which again puts this person into the trauma camp of some kind, whether it was like an abusive relationship or something to that effect, that she had a reason to leave. And on the way back to where she's going, her and her brother end up in Fromville, which is where a lot of other people with these traumas tend to be. But at the end of the scene, we get Donna walking in super conveniently. I want to say right now, I do not think Donna's the mole. But this episode was edited so well, it does make Donna seem like the mole. And that was for sure on purpose to give us this like end battle that we get at the end of the episode with Randall and Donna. What I do find interesting is the particular slight that Randall gave Donna and called her basically a toll operator. And that's her role in this society, in this town. People come into the town, she lets them into the town, gives them the directions, the how-to-dos, and what's going on. So I'm questioning if they both know a little more about each other than what we're seeing now.
Actually, to your point, I've seen a theory start to get thrown around online that somehow Randall is Donna's son. So we'll see if that goes anywhere. There's a lot of theories going around.
I saw that
being people's children.
Asking how much he looks like Donna. I saw that pop up about an hour ago too.
I think that one, even in terms of from theories, I think that one's further out there. I would almost believe that Elgin is Fatima's time traveling son more than this one. Just throwing that out there. Speaking of Jim and Randall, they also come up with a plan that they think is going to get them more information, which is to watch the monsters when they don't know they're being watched.
Good plan.
See, I'm kind of on the other side that it's a good plan. I think the thought behind it is good. The part that I can't quite put together is even when the monsters weren't chasing people at first, they seem to know where people are by the time they show up at night. So if they're in the RV, well, I agree, then it is the Ravens. So to that point, if they're in the RV, I believe that they're going to know they're in the RV. And they'll be fine because they have the talisman. But I don't know that the monsters aren't going to know that they're being
But that can't be true, because if that was the case, nobody would have lived past the time of the talisman or before the time of the talismans. You could hide under in a bush, like Donna said, or like in the cellar or anywhere, right?
Oh, yeah, there it is.
Or just Victor and his canned peaches mobile that he has out there, where he set up a whole mini apartment. They didn't know they were there. So like we talked about a couple weeks ago offline, they're not omniscient. And I don't think that the crows are omniscient either. I think they just see a lot because of them. That's why they saw Father Kotry burying stuff, and they see a lot of things like Tabitha digging the hole. But I don't think they see everything, because if that was the case, if they were really omniscient, then they would see everything and they would hear every conversation, and every single plot point would be a moot point. So I hope that's not the case.
That's a valid point. I do think my personal thought was that it was weird to have that idea and try and watch them without knowing, but that would make sense, because we did talk about that offline too, that how did Victor survive that long?
Well, that's a whole other thing I have. That's a whole other thing. This is about so we'll get to that in a minute, but I think the point was I like the idea of doing reconnaissance.
Okay. Yeah, I can get on board.
Or just in general, like my first thought with this drone is, let's strap an iPhone to it. You can still probably charge it from one of the ways they know how to use the wiring from the last episode, or that bus probably has still power left in it. Send that bad boy as high as you can go with the iPhone. It probably has a camera on it too, and just see what we have going on. So I think reconnaissance is a good idea.
So back to Victor's storyline here in this episode. He's already spoken with Ethan. He gave him his jacket. We did kind of miss a point in the timeline where they're in the diner and Ethan finds a toy, obviously sends Victor into a little bit of an emotional episode, and terrible timing also, because that's when Jade shows up and decides to put him through the ringer, as you had mentioned he's kind of grilling Victor at this point, and Victor says that this is my home, where he finds that toy, which we find out later is not actually Victor's, but Tabitha goes to Victor and consoles him at this point, to where Victor has his conversation like we saw in the trailer for this episode, saying that people who go looking for answers don't come back. And he mentions to Victor that the pictures are what can help him remember, and that he has other pictures that he saved that he thinks can help.
When we open up the trunk of the car, we get a lot of good information on there. So we have pictures of somebody waving at what looks like a bus, which is interesting because we had another bus come in. We had a person that was shooting people, which is reminiscent of Abby. We have the Civil War soldiers in there, and there's an upside down picture of what looks like the bottle tray from season 1. And what tells us, this tells us a few things. It tells us that other people are seeing the Civil War soldiers, and it's not just the person who sees what we think is the evil symbol. Right now, Jade's the only person that saw the Civil War soldiers, but it looks like either Eloise or Victor saw the Civil War soldiers and apparently traveled far enough out into the woods, which was kind of far from Boyd's trek that we saw last season, to see the bottle tray. So either they went really far in the woods, or the woods weren't that far out before and the trees kind of moved and changed, because, you know, that might have happened too. But there's obviously a lot that he has seen from a prior cycle or just over the past X amount of years.
Right. And I think you mentioned one of the biggest takeaways from that too, is that seeing these pictures triggers his remembering of his sister Eloise, because at this point we didn't even know Eloise existed, right? It was always Victor was down in the cellar after his mother left, and we see that whole, honestly, very emotional scene of his sister running back up the stairs after their mother saying, you know, I don't want to, don't leave, stay here, or don't go without us, which obviously explains a lot too of how difficult it was for Victor and why he could have been so hurt by everything that happened.
And I want to go on, but that was a fantastic acting scene, by the way. For all the stuff people might say of some acting being good and some acting being bad, Victor across the board's been top notch. It's a hard role to play an adult that's still like a child and has gone through trauma. And that whole scene right there, that was great. I just want to make sure I say it, that the guy should get some credit for having a real good emotional scene, because it made me, and I know my wife watching it with me, we were like, ugh. After watching that, we felt kind of bad for him.
Yeah, I made a note that I wanted to call out kind of during our review portion when we rate the episode and everything, that I wanted to give Scott McCord some credit for his acting as Victor in that scene. I think it was top notch, especially for a show like this where so much is based on the mystery, that writing and trying to follow it, that we got such good acting.
And I want to say too that picture that we got of what Victor actually called the tower kind of lines up with your theory last week with the cards and the whole thing. It was very specific.
Victor mentions that his mother was leaving to save the children from the tower. That's definitely, I think that's kind of where I'm going with, I want a concrete answer, because that definitely gives us more information, right? We've got his mother leaving to save children from the tower, but there's not an answer. It's almost just more fuel to the fire for the information. So I think that's something that's definitely useful to kind of feed the Tarot Beatuk theory that it is the tower when they're talking about it, and it's got that, they're talking about the lighthouse. So I like the information. Don't get me wrong. I love the information. I'll take anything I can get these days.
Yeah, it lines up pretty well. And again, I'm not saying your theory, and if you guys haven't heard it last episode, you can listen to it. I think there's a timestamp in the description if you want to go right to Rob's theory, but it lines up well, and they keep, and even if it's not that exact theory, because I know there might be some problems with it, the idea of these people assuming particular roles definitely lines up, and I think this is probably part of that, because that the way he calls it the tower and the children inside and all this kind of stuff. And when Victor's mom left that cellar with her 2 kids in it, she was damn sure she was coming back to that cellar, because she didn't, like Rob said offline, give a take care of your sister and like a movie exit, like she was sacrificing herself for her kids. It was an I'll be back. And when she left him there, she basically left him there with like a crayon and was like, I'm out. and she knows what comes out at night. So I feel like she either knew a way to get out of Fromville and it just didn't pan out, or something happened to her along the way. But they also don't say she's actually dead. We don't know if she's dead. I'm just assuming she's dead. But I think that there's a tie-in with Victor's mom or Eloise, or maybe both of them, because they introduced her. And one more thing with that too, fun fact, it looks 99% sure, but I can't say 100% sure because I'm not a writer on the show, that Victor's mom is wearing Tabitha's bracelet that she gave Jim and Jim lost in the hospital from last season. And if that's the case, whoa, daddy, that changes everything. That's a whole new thing about...
There are so many ways that can go.
So many things.
I've seen that she is Victor's mom. I've seen that there was a time travel element where somehow Victor's mom got the bracelet because it was always there. Levels upon levels of just, if that's the case, that's just such a specific detail.
You know, it's
for it to be the same one.
It's funny that Jade brings up chaos theory in this episode, which is a pretty wild, abstract theory. And it also, at that point, when you see the bracelet and then you see Tabitha, it comes across as maybe there's this idea that time is not linear, like kind of like Dr. Manhattan in the comics, or like any omniscient being, like time happens all at the same time for people. Past, present, and future are all the same thing. It's not a linear timeline. And if that's the case, we could be dealing with a thing where things are all happening at the same time. The Civil War soldiers and the mom with the bracelet, all this could be happening at the same time, and it's not a linear timeline, and it's just a whole new thing. I'm not saying that's what it is, but I can't explain how Victor's mom could be wearing a bracelet that really shouldn't have been created for 20 years.
I think to that point, there are so many different theories around this show that there is a strong chance that there are pieces of all of them, right? So maybe the Taro Beatuk theory is mostly correct, but there's also that piece of, like you're saying, non-linear timelines that are kind of stacked on top of each other. It could be all combined, right? So I think there's definitely merit to the idea that the chaos theory and what you were just kind of saying there is potentially going to come true in the long run too. So I do want to jump actually back just a second, because we actually haven't touched on Boyd yet to this point in our discussion. His kind of first big involvement in this episode is he goes to Colony House, where he talks to Ellis first. He does talk to more than one person in this visit, but he talks to Ellis first, notes that, what are you doing up? You just got stabbed, basically, right? How are you this healed? You shouldn't be up and moving around. To which isn't the first time we've noted in town that somebody healed rather quickly. Ethan, after his leg injury in the first season, his mother, Tabitha, also noted how quickly he healed. So I know you had some thoughts kind of regarding that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we all, before they said anything on the show, we as the fan base already made note that people tend to heal a lot faster in the town than they would in regular life. And then the show also made some comments within it, which, therefore solidify the fact that this is happening. So what we have so far is Boyd. It looks like he has no Parkinson's anymore, or at least it's really, really unnoticeable. And his arm scratch from Martin, it was healed really quick. I think enough that Christy had said that, she was surprised how well his arm healed. Ellis's stab wound. And just to be clear before I continue with the list, this show seems to be shot in a very real life time frame. We're not getting like episode 6 was 3 weeks ago or a month ago. It could happen like the next day in the next episode. It's not a large time frame. So the fact that we see Ellis walking around and doing stuff after maybe 2 or 3 days after that kind of stab wound and blood loss is obviously not natural. Ethan's leg wound. But my point here was, I don't know if the pregnancy with Fatima is as miraculous as we think, or if she was healed with whatever ailment was stopping her from getting pregnant outside of Fromville. So when she was in real life, was she infertile for some kind of medical reason? They couldn't fix it. And then she comes here, and over, the year, she's over a year because of her anniversary last season. Did she all of a sudden, that get corrected, and she just didn't know until she got pregnant. And some honorable mentions. If Tilly isn't a mole, which, nah, but if she's not a mole, is the cancer going to be cured? Because that would track. And is the withdrawals that Mari's having going to be worse or better because of whatever is happening in the town?
I disagree. Oh, sorry. I agree on the fact that the healing is there.
You already jumped right to the disagreement.
I just, I have to disagree all the time. Otherwise, where's the fun? No, but I actually agree with the healing part. The thing that I don't have an answer to, I know we want to have answers and theories for everything. The piece that's a little open-ended to me is, why is Jim taking so long to heal then as well? And maybe we don't have an answer right now. Maybe I think that's something we can touch on next episode if we find out more. But that's something that's kind of an odd standout piece to me. Everyone else heals so quickly. We see this possible, again, to your point, miraculous healing almost of Fatima. But Jim's injuries seem to be taking, I'd say, a normal amount of time, right? He still shows a very prominent limp as he's walking around. So something to keep an eye on there as well.
He is pissing off the town more than most. He's poking the bear more than most are.
Correct.
With the exception of maybe Jade, which has his own problems. So I think it might be part of that.
So the other thing I wanted to bring up when Boyd talks to Ellis is that they make a note of pointing out that Ellis doesn't get a chance to tell Boyd about Fatima's pregnancy. I know that that's pretty obvious in a lot of TV shows, and I think that it's potentially setting us up for something in the next couple episodes where something's going to happen to either Ellis or Boyd, because you don't introduce a scene like that of him trying to tell his father that his fiance is pregnant, not give him the ability to tell him, for there not to be something come out of that later. So I don't know if that something happens to Ellis, if something happens to Boyd, or if it's setting up for some kind of bigger potential reveal later. It's just one of those things that I'm not sure if it's going to go negative or positive yet, but wanted to call it out because I think for such a jam-packed episode with so many changes and information, the fact that they made sure to put that in there was very important.
I agree. We probably have some foreshadowing of a potential problem for either Boyd, Ellis, or Fatima.
And then also at Colony House, Boyd takes a moment to go talk to Elgin because he finds out about his dream. And for those that are listening, I'm using air quotes on dream because I'm still not entirely sold on the fact that he was dreaming. But I think a lot of the clues throughout the show and with other people seeing similar things in the dreams that he was explaining what happened to him in the dream. Again, I'm personally not entirely sold because I do think there is a little bit of that shinin that Elgin has, kind of like Sarah, where he can see certain things that other people can't. So I'm still on the fence of if maybe he's experiencing things slightly differently, but he does give Boyd some more information regarding what he saw as well. But the other piece that Elgin gives him, which I think is obviously going to be big lead in for the next 2 episodes, is he suggests making silver bullets with the vial. Boyd shows him the vial of liquid, which he just so happens to be carrying around in his jacket all the time, which seems like a really weird idea to me. But suggests making silver bullets to shoot them from a safe distance and see if it works. Which, like I said, obviously I think is going to be a big plot point for us in episode either 9 or 10 to try and use that and see how that goes.
Yeah, even the title of the episode, Magic Balls of Fire. But there's also a picture in Victor's car, or in the back of his trunk, his trunk portfolio, where there's a house that has stars and then some round red circle-y swirl things in it that could also be these magic balls of fire, and that could be what we're seeing in the trailer for the next episode.
So after Boyd gets this idea for the silver bullets, he goes to Kenny, because he and Kenny are going to do this, try this experiment out. But they go to the clinic where they're confronted by, well, not confronted because Christy and Mari are dealing with Mari's withdrawal here. Still very extreme on the couch. That aside, they immediately jump to the fact that they were hearing weird noises out of the boiler room, which, as we know, the boiler room is a very bad place in Fromville. They want basically Boyd, but at this point, Kenny kind of mans up with them as well and decides to go down with them to check out what this noise is. And we learn very quickly that something is going on under the sheet with Mr. Smiley's body. And when Boyd lifts back the sheet, we see just a ton of huge cicadas crawling all over this body.
Yeah, it definitely has a plague feel. What I do think is happening, this is my take, is that I think we went from larva to cicada. I think they grew into the cicadas. I think the larva and the cicada are one and the same. And that either means that the monsters are now cicadas and they're just out there getting new monsters, or they transform again. But cicadas usually mean rebirth or transformation or something to that effect. So the monsters could be transformed into something else. They could be making new monsters, or maybe that's the way for them to end and get the hell out of Fromville, is they just die and eventually, fly away.
I'm definitely on the same page about the worms becoming them. The question that I have is, do they only evolve into these cicadas when they're in a monster? Mm-hmm. We saw them survive in Martin for a very long time, like you kind of noted offline. Boyd didn't have any symptoms or anything seeming to happen, like they could have been undergoing that change when they were inside of his body. But it was once they went into Mr. Smiley that we see this change occur. And we haven't seen or heard cicadas, at least off the top of my head, to this point in the show. So it's not like there's a horde of cicadas living out in the woods. I'm wondering, is it because they were inside the body of the monster that they were able to transform into that cicada from the worm?
Something else to know for the cicadas, on the From Twitter page, they had another one of those quick short movies that tells you what phobia things are. I don't remember the phobia's name, but it's another...
It was for insects.
Yeah, another phobia for insects. It's more fear. And it still kind of leads me back to the same idea that whatever is controlling the town, or the town itself, or the monsters, because they like to play with their prey and build that fear toxin up in there, that I think whatever we're dealing with feeds off fear. Kind of like the monster in Smile, where it wanted to scare you more and more and more to creep you out until it attacked. I think it's the same kind of vibe. I think this entity feeds off fear, and it just uses all the different kind of fears to get there.
And those cicadas themselves that obviously were freaking Boyd and Kenny out. When Donna shows up conveniently again,
Stop with that. It's not Donna.
When Donna shows up, she's extremely mad that she hasn't been in on a loop of this. But when she's taken down to go see the body, cicadas are gone. As Boyd says, the door was shut. Not sure where the cicadas went. How could they have gotten out? That one, I'll be honest, unless you've got a good theory for how they got out, I don't have a good idea right now.
I don't have a good theory for how they got out. Again, they seem to show up in dreams, and maybe they were dreaming when they saw them initially. That's the problem. I don't think at this point, I think what's coming up is we might not know what is reality and what's not all the time. I think they're going to blur the lines with us, so we don't really know. But for your Donna thing, here's my question. If she's a mole, that means she's getting some kind of orders like Sarah did from whatever the hell's running the show. How is she not aware that a monster was killed and is in the bottom of the boiler room for like 2 days? How did the crows not mention that to their man on the ground, that you should get over there? They got the worms, they got the bile. We don't want them touching this stuff. She seemed completely shocked, had no idea, wanted to burn the body. If she was the mole, I guess that goes for all the people in the town. If there's a mole, how come the mole wasn't alerted to the fact that the monster is in there?
Because I think to that point, there's nothing you could do to help without being obvious. In a location like that, I think it would have been hard to get to. And maybe she's just a really good actress.
Well, she is a very good actress. I'll give her that.
She's the Scott McCord of Fromville.
Maybe. I just think if she shouldn't have seemed so shocked, but to your point, she could have just been playing it off.
I agree, because I think there's been a lot of times where she has been extremely emotional about things one way or another. Like when she found out about Fatima's pregnancy. That was a big, she was kind of over the top with such emotion there. But to that point, Donna tells them to burn the body, which they go about doing, and Randall catches them moving the body from out of the clinic to go outside, which is when Donna leaves the clinic. Randall caught them, and a little while later, Randall catches up to Donna and apologizes and says, "Oh, I think we got off on the wrong foot. We should work together."
Don't worry about that.
We find out at the very end of the episode that was a whole misdirect. Well, I don't know if I'd say a whole misdirect. I think most of us at home were kind of like, something's going on here.
I think Donna knew.
Obviously.
I think she knew.
Well,
and just was overpowered. She didn't seem sold.
That's a very valid point, because at the end of the episode, we'll get back to one thing real quick before we end after this. But after that, we see Randall has tied Donna to a tree, just full on sacrificial style. Looks like he's about to burn a witch at the stake when Jim finds them out by the RV. Because clearly Jim and Randall have their idea of watching the monsters, and Randall has come up with the idea, obviously, to set some bait to try and get these monsters to come around. I'll add, I think this is leading us to a very specific answer one way or another, because personally, if you couldn't tell by now, I think Donna's the mole.
Blasphemy.
I think Donna's the mole. There's a big contingency of people that believe Randall could be the mole.
I am one of those people.
And I believe you're wrong. And I think this setup is leading us to a very tense reveal of who the mole is. Because you've got Randall on one side that people think is, I think I might be on an island thinking that Donna is, so I probably...
You're not on an island. It's a lot of people out there that think that, but
I've only seen a very small few, so I might be pulling at straws, but I do think it's setting up kind of to where I was saying that Ellis scene is leading to something with him and Boyd potentially down the road. But I think that Donna and Randall are being set up for a very obvious reveal of some kind, that they're putting them in this scenario where it's going to go head to head. Something's going to happen. And I think it's going to be that we find out who the mole is. And the reason I think is that either Randall's onto something and Donna is the mole and something will happen to prove that, or Randall is the mole and he has actually been targeting Donna because she's the threat. He knows that she's the biggest threat, so he's trying to find a way to eliminate it. I still think I'm right about Donna, but it could be that Randall is, and he's kind of trying to circumvent, trying to get the blame off of him a little bit and trying to take out a threat.
All right, hold on. I'm running in from left field over here because I got something that, as we're talking now, I'm thinking something else. What if they're about to do it? Randall's going to do his thing, and either two things happen. One, the town itself stops which one is the mole getting hurt or exposed, right? The town puts a stop to it because we know that they've already said when you go against the town pushes back. So maybe the town puts a stop to it. Or as Randall's about to do something and Donna's about to do something and that comes up, Jim comes out and says, "Stop, I'm the mole." Because although he's the mole, he's not a total jerk and doesn't want to see Donna get killed. He's like, we got to get inside the damn RV right now because things are coming and I'm the mole. And that's why he seems like he's kind of going off the deep end lately. It could be Jim that steps in between the two, and it's neither one of them, and they're just giving a subterfuge and we're not sure. Boom.
I think there's too much of Jim digging for answers. I think they've shown us too much of that for that to be the case. Also with the fact that Tabitha is seeing things and their son is on a quest, and Julie's doing whatever Julie's doing these days. So
talking to people about
getting information from people and not using any of it. That's what Julie's doing these days. But I think there's been too much backstory with Jim for him to be the mole. But I could see the misdirect being a very good twist. I just don't know that it would work out well.
I agree with you a little bit. I do agree that they might have set up too much of Jim being a skeptic to be the mole.
I agree. So the last thing we saw was Randall tying down into the tree. But the other piece we see at the end of this episode is as the Scooby Gang are in town, we hear screaming come from Sarah's house. And we hear the sound of the cicadas coming out of the house. And the man runs out and he's yelling for help and he's all covered in blood. So we've got kind of two cliffhangers here at the end of the episode. 3 if you want to count Victor and Tabitha finding the pictures, but I don't count that as much of a cliffhanger as just learning the information. And we see, again, the man running out of the house with the cicada noises, and we've got Randall and Donna in the woods with Jim there as well.
All right, so end of the episode. Where in the From universe does this episode rank for you? 1 to 10, Rob? Give it to me.
Oh, man. I think I'm looking at I think I'm looking at a 9.
Okay. All right. I like that. I like that answer. I was going to give an 8.5, so I think we're kind of on point here.
One last piece of theory I want to touch on before we get out of here, because it's something that I was yelling into my microphone at Chris almost immediately after we signed off last time. Chris and I were talking through a couple things, and he showed me the picture of one of the posters from, and it shows the town in the background behind Boyd. And I think I figured out a huge piece of this show. And it's that I think the symbol that Jade is seeing is actually a map of the tunnels underground. And that's because when you see the picture in the background of Fromville behind Boyd on the poster, it's rounded off. There's trees lining the outside. The symbol is a circle as well. And if you were to lay that under the town, you could see the tunnels running under the Matthews house, under Colony House, under certain areas of town where you'd be able to run basically from there out into the woods, which to me would make sense why it's associated with the monsters and with the evil, because it's their map of the town. That's my theory on that one. I'm sticking to it. I'm about 99% sure it's true. So the 1% that it's not, y'all can come back and tell me I told you so. But I'm about as confident in this one piece of theory than I am about anything else. That'll do it for this episode. But before we go, we've got to hit our question of the week. What do you think happened inside Sarah and Nathan's house at the end of the episode? Tell us in all of the gory detail.
And to answer the question that Rob just posed, leave a review on Spotify, drop a comment in the YouTube videos, or find us on Twitter at crappy_reviews and let us know your answers. And while you're there, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us to join in future episodes. Thanks for listening to Crappy Reviews with Chris and Rob, and we'll catch you on the flippity flop.